blade roast. Now, growing up, blade steak, was always a crappy piece of meat, really. And the reason I think so is because the way they cut it, they just cut right across all these different muscle groups. You see, right away, I've separated two very different muscle groups, and here I'm going to separate the third. You can find a nice little grouping of connective tissue and fat and run your knife along it. And you got to do this because these different muscles don't run the same way. So you can't cook them exactly the same way, or some of them are going to wind up being very tough, because in some cases you'll be cutting across the grain and it's just going to wind up being a poor way of doing things. So here I'm finding the connective tissue, or I found it, and I'm running my knife along it. You notice that there's fat and sinew on both parts, on all parts of this. And I'm separating here a fourth little muscle, and notice that I've got little fat caps on each one of these pieces. And they all run a little bit differently. Now here's the thickest of the four. I'm going to cut it right in half, but I'm cutting it with the grain. Basically, I've cut across the grain. So I have two pieces that are exactly the same. And now I'm going to make stewing meat with this, because this is cheaper to buy than to buy stewing beef. And frankly, I think it cooks up and tastes much, much better. For that entire roast that you're looking at right now, it was about $10, and it's over 3 pounds. I'd say it's 3.5 pounds. So about a kilo and 3/4, give or take. And I'm cutting it into 1-inch cubes, and I'm going to use those for stewing beef. Now, the reason I had to cut these muscles separately is because not all the grains run exactly the same direction. So by doing that, I can cut them into my 1-inch cubes more effectively. And I'm not going to wind up with any strangely shaped little pieces that wind up being tough. Notice also that I'm cutting on top of my butcher paper. Here's a piece that I have to cut on a funny angle because of the muscle grains. Look very closely the way the fibers are running, and I've cut across them. So basically I had to make my cut on a slight angle to the sides. If I hadn't done that, I'd wind up with pieces that cook up tough. So I'm cutting on this angle, and then I'll cut my 1-inch cubes. So I'm cutting on top of the butcher paper because I don't want to dirty my cutting board. I don't want to have to wash my cutting board. What I'm going to do with this is straight away I'm going to make a beef stew with half of this meat, and the other half is going to go into a Tupperware container and in the fridge, and I'll use it throughout the week. I don't have to use it the next day. Beef has a pretty good shelf life, as long as you don't leave it soaking in blood. It's going to last for a while. It's got a few days for sure. So here's the pieces. I'm not going to cut those. I'm basically going to store those in my Tupperware, put a lid on them. It would even be good to put a little bit of paper towel folded up in the bottom to absorb the blood. And here you have it, another little butchery lesson. This meat I'm wrapping up, and I'm going to put it by my stove because it's going in the pot